I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer for Gold Derby, and I'm joined today by Eric Dawson, the casting director of Netflix's Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. And Eric, I know that Ryan Murphy kind of had a specific approach to casting this show in that he wanted to re-team with some people that he had worked with sort of a while ago, but also expand his world a bit and welcome some new faces. So, what were those conversations like at the very beginning with him and Ian Brennan in terms of what you wanted this ensemble to look like?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it's been fantastic over the years to sort of create this acting troupe that
Mhm.
we go to and we see them do all sorts of different things. And in this show, I think there was 250 actors in total, and I think 240 of them were sort of new to the Ryan Murphy world. So that was really sort of great fun, is to bring new people in and introduce them to some new people. And it wasn't, to him, the star of the show was the story, and so I don't
Mhm.
think he ever felt like he needed to populate it with a bunch of big stars. And almost every single person, I think there's about three people who didn't audition. They were all
Mhm.
auditions. It wasn't about making offers. Nisi didn't audition and Evan didn't audition.
Mhm.
And um, like Richard Jenkins didn't audition,
Right.
but everybody else sort of did.
Wow.
And even with Evan was unavailable. He was, when we started, he was doing American Horror Story season 10 in
Ah.
Massachusetts, and
Mhm.
that was during the pandemic. And so we were going to shoot this on the West Coast. So it was almost an impossibility that he was going to be able to do this. And so I went out and searched the world for other choices, knowing that we really would have loved to have Evan do it, but it would, the Horror Story producers' hair would catch on fire if they knew we were going to steal him. But anyway, so we went through the whole process. We saw all these wonderful actors, and then
Mhm.
at the end of the day, Ryan says, "Let's see if we can make it work with that. We have to give it a shot." And so somehow, in the middle of the pandemic, we moved him back and forth between coasts, and it was a great decision. And
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
one that most producers wouldn't have made. And that's what's so
Right.
great about Ryan, is he sees the importance of casting and does things that other producers would say, well, that's impossible. He's doing another show. And that doesn't deter Ryan.
Yeah, of course. And with let's stay on Evan right away because taking on the role of Jeffrey Dahmer is obviously a very daunting task, would be a daunting task for anyone, but and even for Evan, someone who's played a lot of crazy characters
Yes.
in the Ryan Murphy verse. So why did you reach out to him specifically, and what did it take to get him on board? Was there any hesitation, or was it kind of an immediate yes, outside of sort of location issues or scheduling issues?
The scheduling issues, I think, were hard because, I mean, there's no way he was going to take this on unless he could do 100%.
Right.
And I mean, there's right. I mean, Evan is just such a committed actor, and I think he was a little worried about the scheduling and
Mm,
being able to also fulfill his role that he was really enjoying on Horror Story. He also, wanted to know about the angle of Don. He wanted to know everything, and obviously the relationship that he and Ryan have is, goes back a decade. And
mhm.
so Ryan was able to lead him through and let him know that this was really going to be, was not a blood and gore and
Right.
sensationalized thing. It was really going to be seen from the victim's point of view. And but it was not a huge leap of faith
Right.
thinking that Evan would just kill it or
Yeah.
knock it out of the ballpark.
Yeah, no pun intended, right? Because yeah, I mean, he like I said, he's played so many characters throughout the Ryan Murphy verse, and we've sort of seen the whole range of his emotion. And I think what I really like about his performance in this is his grounded, naturalistic approach to the character, because he could have overplayed it. He could have tried to make Jeffrey more charismatic or smarter or anything like that, but he really kept the performance grounded. And I think that's incredibly important for this story, wouldn't you say?
I think his stillness, his
Mm,
confidence in being and doing so little made everybody lean forward. I know that's with my family. We were watching it, and literally you could just see us lean into it, and the camera was so brave just to like
yeah,
be there. And so often anymore with editing, it's all and this and the camera would just stay there, and he would just stay there in that
mm,
moment, And I think that was what made the show work.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think one of those moments is actually scene, the sandwich scene between him and Glenda, and that takes me to Niecy Nash Betts, because what she's really talked about, doing press for the show, and even before that, is that she's kind of been pigeonholed as kind of a comedic actor in this business, and that people have kind of underestimated the wide range of her talent and her acting skills. So talk about, landing on Niecy for this incredibly important part of Glenda Cleveland.
Again, so she's one that we've had like over a decade. I mean, I think she did Popular for us back in the 90s, and in a comedic role. But also, like My Office has her in Rookie Feds, so,
Yeah.
But again, I think the thing that's most incredible about Ryan, and I've been there for this journey of him as a producer, is that he understands talent. And he understands that talented people, in the same way in American Horror Story, that one year you play good, the next year it's the opposite. You're crazy. And he he knows that good actors are good actors, and that they can, and then he writes to their voice so well. And when he gets like Niecy's voice, or whoever it is, he just has such a knack of getting their rhythms down, that you're not forcing them to do something that is not their natural rhythms or whatever. He's just, it's just great writing. And like I said, and he's just super brave. And some producers, you present an idea to them, and they have to see this, they have to think it. Ryan, he's like that always. He knows what he wants. He's like, do it. It's a fantastic relationship as a casting director, not to feel like you're always trying to drag somebody along, or he knows it. He's very confident in his casting.
Yeah, especially when you've worked with people quite a few times, sometimes you can like see through their performance and see, what parts you would like to give them down the line. And I feel like Ryan really does that. And it kind of speaks to what you were just saying, that, one year they'll play one thing and then the next year they'll do something completely different. And I really like that about his shows. And I feel like with Niecy, we really just get to see her digging into her dramatic chops. She has such a responsibility. We always talk about the responsibility of Evan playing Jeffrey, and there's obviously a responsibility there, but Niecy also has a responsibility playing Glenda, this composite character that combines, not just the experiences of, Glenda Cleveland and Pamela Bass, but also it kind of represents an entire community, and she just does a phenomenal job. So
it was just a powerhouse, and yet the pain was so raw and real, and but yeah, and then the scenes between the two of them together were just out of this world. Little acting class there.
Yeah, especially that sandwich scene is such a like you say, it's sort of like a masterclass in performance, and just what they're able to do with their faces, and when not even uttering a single word, it's just absolutely impressive, and it makes that scene really uncomfortable to watch, because you've seen the scene, so. And
that's what was so amazing, I think, is that I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stop.
No, go ahead.
Is that as hard of show, the show is hard to watch. The show is hard to make. It's hard. Everything about it was hard, and yet it just touched people on such a level, and they came back, and they came back, and they came back, and they came back, and it just I thought just showed the level of writing and performances, and I just thought that they were so sensitive to the storyline, and somehow I'm sure a lot of people, when they started watching it, weren't sure what they were gonna think of it, and
especially because this story has been done before, and I think people are always, when you dig into a story that's already been dug into, I think a lot of people always think about, will I get a new perspective, or what will this show add to my knowledge, or whatever else. And I think the fact that this show is told from different perspectives really kind of has informed the reaction to it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And I do want to kind of stay on this this aspect of being underestimated, because I think two people who were also underestimated are Molly Ringwald and Penelope Ann Miller, who play Sherry and Joyce Dahmer. And I think Molly has even talked about that herself. And from my understanding, both of them auditioned, and both of them were kind of an easy, immediate yes from Ryan and everyone else. So, what was it about their audition tapes or their auditions that made them perfect fits for these individual roles?
And I think they both auditioned for both. I'm trying to remember now.
Oh,
It's been
wow.
because we were trying to figure out the relationship to, and Richard Jenkins was the first person that we cast in the
Mm,
show, and he was older than what was written. So it sort of skewed some things, like how old would his grandmother be? Because he's now in his mid 70s
right.
versus in his 50s. And so Michael Learned had to be older. The wives had to be older. And we were originally going to have everybody play both young and old. And
Interesting.
anyway, when we cast Richard, which was a stroke of brilliance on Ryan's part, because I think he was the heart of the show, it changed the wives. And so it wasn't important for Ryan. The actresses were important. It wasn't. He didn't need names. He just wanted somebody who could knock the roles out of the park. And so we didn't chase anybody. We just said anybody who wants to do it, put yourself on tape. We would love to see it. And those two came in, and it was like, I think I saw them both the same day, and all of a sudden it became clear to me the relationships, the differentiation between the two women. Anyway, and you know, the relationship with Dom. Anyway, it all sort of went like when the clouds part, and where you go, oh, now I see it. And anyway, and yeah, it was an easy sell for Ryan.
Well, that's always great to hear, and I love the energy that each of them brings into the show. I think with Molly, she kind of brings this like calmness, this stillness, this tenderness onto the show, and she, I believe, is kind of in many ways the voice of reason, at least in Lionel's life. When I talked to Richard Jenkins a few weeks ago, we talked about how, you know, he kind of, or he says that he wants to move on, you know, at the end of the story. And we talked about how it's Sherry's influence in his life that kind of may or may not have led to that. And I think Molly sells that so well. So, and I just talked to Penelope yesterday, and we sort of
Wow.
dug into all the layers of that character. And my goodness, does she do a great job of bringing out all the nuances of, you know, her mental health struggles and, you know, everything else connected to that character.
She's such a wonderful actress, and you're right. Molly was sort of the grounding force to him, and the voice of reason. And anyway, we were just so fortunate that both of them were game to come aboard. I don't know. It was a wonderful day when it worked out for both of them. Especially, like I said, it was always changing about like which role or which version, the older version or the younger version would cheat. And so it was sort of fluid at times. And they were both very willing to sort of, you know, go down that road with us.
That's fantastic. And you know, with Penelope, I believe the younger actress is Savannah Brown. It's sort of incredible to see how in sync their performances are with each other. I don't know if they work together or if they had the opportunity to talk to each other or, you know, have any discussions before filming. But I was just so impressed by how much they sort of emulated each other. So yeah, great casting on that.
I was really impressed with that, and I was impressed with Josh Brayton, who played the young Richard as well, because Richard is so specific in his rhythms and everything. And I thought Josh did a really nice job with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you know, we kind of touch on this aspect of this story being told from multiple perspectives, including the perspective of some of Jeffrey's victims and their families. You know, I would love to talk about, you know, all the talented actors that you cast, but I'm going to focus on sort of the breakout star of this entire show, and that's Rodney Burford. And I would assume so Tony Hughes, that must have been one of the most difficult roles to cast given the weight of his story. So what were the qualities you were kind of looking for in the actors for this part? And then how did you ultimately land on Rodney?
It was a difficult role because we obviously needed we knew what Rodney, what Tony Hughes looked like. Age was very specific, slight, handsome, model, black, gay. You know, it was deaf, obviously. And Ryan was smart in that he gave us the material very early on. And I think it was probably months that we looked, and we immediately sort of went through the acting channels, and there was not an appropriate person that was like, represented by an agent and a manager and stuff. And Rodney had done like a reality television show, but hadn't done a lot of acting. And unfortunately, it was also at the beginnings of the pandemic, so we couldn't even be in rooms with people. And so
Oh, right.
there, when you have people who don't have as much, experience, you can guide them through. And instead, it's people doing it at their home with their best friend or their mother or whatever. And it was a lot of material. And so, some of it was running around, getting chased, getting, all that sort of stuff. And so it was sort of hard to manage the auditions. And I think by the time we showed Rodney's tape to Ryan, I think it was maybe at least the third attempt at it, because we'd gone back and given him notes to how better to present it. We also figured out what scenes were more important than other scenes, and how we sort of presented it to everybody. But I think that was probably one of the highlights of the entire season for me, because I was so scared of casting that role incorrectly. And it ended up being a breakout role, and he was just great. And I think Evan, everything I've heard is that Evan was just so giving to him on the set. And so I take my hat off to Evan too.
Yeah. That's,
And I think Paris directed that episode.
Yeah.
And I mean, how lucky for Rodney to have Paris there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've read a lot about that episode and a lot about Rodney's performance. And I'll tell you one word that came up in every single text or article that I read, which is the warmth that he imbues that performance with. And I felt like when I was watching that, that's absolutely how I would describe it as well. And the reason that performance just sticks out, I think everyone who finishes that show remembers that performance. That, at least it's among the performances that you remember, and the casting for it just had to be so spot on for all of that to really work. And yeah, hats off to the casting department there as well. So
yeah, I mean, I think he was so sweet and warm and effusive, and as a viewer, we know where it's going.
Yeah,
it just breaks your heart. And then as we're on that conversation, just Karen Molina White, who played his mother.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, one of my favorite actresses of all time. And I sent her audition to Ryan and just said, like, we must. And he wrote back, do it. I mean, it was like immediate. Again, that was such a raw, fantastic performance. That was one of my favorite moments in the entire season too, was her in the courtroom.
Absolutely. I was just going to mention her. Was it then you mentioned that it was very raw? Was it the rawness in her performance then that sort of convinced you? Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't even get through her audition, truthfully.
Wow. Yeah, her performance is extraordinary, and that episode is extraordinary, and everything about it just worked so well. And on a final note, I do kind of want to look at your career in general, because the shows that you've worked on, especially with Ryan, have not just changed the television landscape, but have also changed people's lives. I mentioned before we started here that Glee certainly changed my life. So looking back at, the many actors you've cast in roles that went on to become these iconic characters, and at looking at how many careers you have also kickstarted by casting people in roles on these shows, how does all of that feel like for you? How does all that reflect on you at this point in time?
I just feel so honored to have worked with Ryan for 24 years and be part of it. And it's been such a wonderfully collaborative casting connection that we've had. And it's one of the few places in town that it's not casting by committee, it's casting by you and Ryan and the director, and that's it. And I think that it's just been so amazing to have these scripts land in my lap with him and be able to, I understand, what he likes, what he doesn't like. And we have just such a shorthand, and I don't know, I just feel very blessed to have taken this ride.
Yeah, it's the benefit of a long time collaboration as well, is that you just get comfortable with one another and have that great rapport. And us viewers are thankful for that collaboration because look what it's brought us. Um, yeah, Eric, thank you so much for your time today and for walking me through the casting process. Very fascinating to listen to, and yeah, congratulations on the success of this show.
Thank you for taking time out to do it.